if you want to find really great Christian community, you can find it almost anywhere. And if you want to find trouble, you can find it almost anywhere. Scott, our podcast listeners or viewers, depending upon how they consume the content, probably know that you're a graduate of the University of Illinois. Yep. They may not know that you're a ceramic engineering major. That's right. Yeah. During your time on campus, did you ever share an apartment with some guys? No, I did not. You were always in campus housing, a dorm of some sort or another. Yeah. Yep. My junior year at college, I shared an apartment with a few guys. Okay. And there was an apartment right next door to ours, also some guys. And that apartment had a terrible, terrible smell. Oh my. Yeah, and the amazing thing is that the guys who lived in that apartment were not aware that there was a terrible smell. They just got used to it. Yes, they spent so much time in there. Yeah. Their noses worked fine. Right. But because of spending so much time in there, they were unaware of the smell. They needed somebody from outside the apartment to tell them something or someone in your apartment stinks. Our podcast friends may not know that we have offices right next to one another. Yes. And I need to tell you. Are you going to tell me? I need to tell you about a smell. That is the senior pastor of East White Oak Bible Church, Scott Burkle. My name is Treg Whitaker, and you have joined us for the Ask Scott podcast. The story about these guys that couldn't smell their own stink is a little bit like culture, isn't it? It is. We're in it, we're surrounded by it, and because of that, often we're unaware of its evils. We don't even know what we don't know. Yeah. On Sunday, you preached from Genesis chapter 34. Yes. And you showed us the impact of and the influence of culture. Mm-hmm. And we have a few questions about the passage and the sermon. Sure. Are you ready? I think so. All right, let's do it. Yeah. The passage starts out with this sexual assault. Yes. And it's very clear that Dinah's brothers know that this is a wrong thing, a thing that should not be done. Yes. Right? Yeah. But where did they get that sense of wrongness? Because the story, of course, takes place before the giving of the law. Right. So how do they know that it's wrong? Yeah. So Romans chapter 2 tells us that there's a law written in our hearts. You know, there's some things that we instinctively know are right or wrong. But over the course of time, cultures develop things that they identify as right and wrong. In fact, many of the cultures of the Fertile Crescent, Egypt through Mesopotamia, had well-defined laws before the giving of the law of Moses. In fact, there's so much that we have uncovered archaeologically of these laws that I have this book called Ancient Near Eastern Texts. Yeah. And a big part of it is a whole bunch of the laws that were done in Mesopotamia and Egypt as a result of all of these questions when people get together and things happen. How do you decide if you accidentally kill somebody or if you purposefully kill? What should a culture do? Yeah. In fact, there's one I'll just read you here that is from around 300 years before Jacob. Okay, it says, if a man gives bride money for another man's daughter, but another man seizes her forcibly without asking the permission of her father and her mother, and deprives her of her virginity, it is a capital offense, and he shall die. A similar kind of setting as what we see in Genesis 34. Not precisely, but the point is that they are trying to cover the whole gamut of situations and cases. And that's why in this book it actually says, now we aren't, and this book was published in the 1960s. Many more texts have been discovered since then. It said, we've made just a bare selection of a few of these texts because there are so many. Sure. Okay. Now, Dinah was the gal that gets assaulted.
Yep.
And you speculated a little bit on Sunday about the reason she was headed to Shechem to see the women of the land. That I think it was your phrase. You said she may have been looking for trouble.
Right.
Let's grant that. Let's say that she was out looking for trouble.
It's not stated in the text, but it's possible.
Let's grant that. Are you suggesting that she may have been responsible for the sexual assault, or that she bears some responsibility in it, even if it's partially responsible?
Yeah, so the problem there is trying to say that because someone did something wrong, and it led to something else that was wrong, that doesn't mean that you're somehow guilty of the second wrong. Okay, so the fact that she was sexually assaulted does not mean that what she did was what makes that possible. Now, there's certainly ways that you protect yourself. We all do. Yeah. We lock our doors. Yeah. We have passwords. Yeah. We don't just say, well, whatever. We're aware of a world that we live in, and anyone who would, for example, share their personal information and passwords on social media, and then is shocked, for example, that they have all of their bank accounts emptied. One could say, hey, that's their fault. Well, they were foolish and they did wrong. That does not mean that the other thing of the person or persons who took the money didn't do the wrong.
Sure.
And I think we need to be careful about that.
One of the things that you did as you moved through the passage, you identified some goals of the different characters in the passage, right?
Yeah.
And the goal that you suggested for the brothers who took great offense at what happened to their sister, their goal was justice, you said. What they ended up doing was just giving full vent to their anger, right?
Yes.
Now, does giving full vent to your anger equal justice? Or would there have been a more just response by the brothers?
Yeah. For sure could have been a more just response, because they went global on it, right? They didn't just deal with Shechem or even his father Hamor. They went full on to all the men of Shechem, like painting the whole town in a capital punishment for one person's crime. Part of this is related to the honor-shame stuff that I talked about. They felt the shame and they wanted to dishonor everybody, okay? And that's not right. Part of the reason why there's some things in the West about our justice system, which is better than the justice systems in honor-shame culture, is we don't globalize. At least we don't see that as right.
Yeah.
Okay? And so, of course, there could have been better answers for this. They could have brought it to the men at the city gate where things are decided, and they could have said, look, she didn't want to be forcibly assaulted. She doesn't want to marry this guy. In fact, we think he should die.
Yeah.
And have taken, because many things are decided at the city gate.
Yeah. When a young person wants to explore culture, which is what may have motivated Dinah in her heading out from the family to...
All young adults do.
Young adults do.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a young adult who is interested in exploring the culture? Is the culture something to be discovered, or is it something to be defended against?
Yeah. This is a powerful question. Because the answer is yes, right? For us as believers, I think there can be a tendency with our children, particularly as they get older and are wanting to explore, for us to be too confining. And almost in our effort to confine too much, we cause kind of a compounding effect of saying, oh, you don't want me to do that? I'll do even more,
Sure.
and the rebellion can go wider. So there does need to be an awareness that there's many things about culture that are wonderful and beautiful and things to be explored. There's also dangers and hazards out there that there needs to be an awareness of.
Yeah.
For example, one thing that I told my boys, nothing good ever happens after midnight. So
let your exploring be done before midnight.
Before midnight is a great thing. That kind of thing.
Jacob was really concerned about his family intermarrying with Canaanites.
Yes.
That culture.
Of course.
Are there cultures with whom Christians should not marry?
Yeah, so the issue is not whether or not he should marry a Canaanite. Remember, I made the distinction. Canaanites can become Jewish, but Jews should not become Canaanites. And this is the hazard that Jacob is wanting to avoid. The story of Ruth and Boaz is a story of a Canaanite woman. I mean, well, it's not exactly Canaanite, but kind of.
Yes.
Okay. Marrying into a Jewish family and becoming a part of the line of David and of our Savior. That's not a bad thing. Where it's bad is when you go out and you become Canaanite. So, to take the question to the modern time with believers, no believer should ever be marrying an unbeliever. Ever. Okay? It leads to complete and total disaster for the individuals involved, for their families.
Yeah.
If a person becomes a believer, should you think, well, because they're from an unbelieving family, I should never marry them? No. Will there be problems associated with being married to someone who's a believer who has an unbelieving family? Yes. Will there be problems associated with marrying a believer who's married to who's in a family of believers but aren't really walking that strongly with Jesus? Yeah. Will you even have problems if you marry a believer who has a really strong believing family? The answer is yes, but marry in the Lord.
Yeah. We have an example here, I think, in Simeon and Levi of vigilantism. They're just going to take the situation into their own hands.
Oh, for sure.
Is there any righteous vigilantism? Are those two things mutually exclusive? Is it ever appropriate for a person to take the situation into their own hands?
Yeah, Treg, you ask a question that is so wide that it's difficult. Ever. Ever.
Sure.
I'm not sure that I can answer by saying that you couldn't come up with a situation where it's required to take the matters of justice into your own hands. In fact, it's probably very possible that you could construct that. But I would say you have to exhaust the present means of justice before you would ever even entertain something like that. And it's clear that these brothers are acting with some planning, but also some dispatch.
Yeah.
In other words, they're hot.
Right.
Yeah. And they're going to take care of this problem.
Now, Jacob had to decide where he was going to settle his family, where they were going to have their livestock, and where they were going to raise their kids.
Yep.
Not unlike decisions that people in our congregation are needing to make about where they're going to work, where their kids are going to go to school, where they're going to live. What sorts of advice might you give to someone who is wrestling with that sort of decision?
Yeah. So I would say that almost anywhere you go, and I tell this to students that are headed off to college, I say, if you want to find really great Christian community, you can find it almost anywhere. And if you want to find trouble, you can find it almost anywhere. Now, are there some places where there's more and other places where there's less? Yes. And that leads to a decision that you have to make before the Lord. For example, if someone is called to plant a church in New York City, the circumstances and the issues that they're going to face will be widely different than Carlock, Illinois. But that doesn't mean that the issues of the world, the flesh, the devil, the ways in which the culture is wanting to squeeze us into its mold won't be real in either place.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. That'll do it for this episode of the Ask Scott podcast. You can find the Ask Scott podcast on our YouTube channel, that is at East White Oak. You can also follow East White Oak Bible Church on Facebook and Instagram. We look forward to you joining us the next time Pastor Scott answers your questions about the Bible on the Ask Scott podcast.